For years, the truth stayed hidden. The victims forgotten. The cases left cold, until science revealed what time could not. This is Decades in the Dark, where cold cases are brought back to light. It was a quiet Saturday in Beaumont, Texas, January 14th, 1995. When police arrived at the small brick home of 31-year-old schoolteacher Mary Katherine Edwards, they found the kind of scene that stays with detectives forever. The young woman, known for her kindness and her dedication to her students, was found submerged in her bathtub. The water had been left running. At first, it looked like a tragic accident. But within minutes, detectives saw things that told a different story. There were ligature marks on her wrists and ankles. Her face showed bruising. And there was evidence she had been sexually assaulted before she died. The tub was partially filled, her head forced beneath the water. The killer had tied her up, overpowered her, and drowned her. There was no forced entry, suggesting she knew her attacker. Nothing was stolen. Her purse, jewelry, and car keys were all there. Whoever did this came not for money, but for her. Kathy was a bright, beloved teacher and former homecoming queen. Friends described her as gentle but strong, always helping others. She had graduated from Lamar University, married young, and divorced soon after, but stayed close to her circle of friends from Westbrook High School. She had no enemies, no double life, no secrets that anyone could see. So when detectives asked who might want to hurt her, no one had an answer. That Saturday, Kathy's twin sister, Mary Ellen, tried calling her several times. She said she felt uneasy, a feeling she couldn't explain. When Kathy didn't answer, she said later, "I just knew something wasn't right." Beaumont detectives canvassed the area. No one had seen anything suspicious that day. They collected DNA from the sexual assault kit, but in 1995 the technology was still limited. The profile was uploaded to the state's CODIS database, but there were no matches. For years the file sat in storage, cold. Every so often, a new detective would take a look, hoping fresh eyes might spot something. But the DNA remained the only real clue, and without a match, it went nowhere. Time passed. Kathy's family never stopped hoping. Then, in 2020, the case was reopened as part of a push to review unsolved homicides using forensic genealogy. The preserved DNA sample from the assault was sent to a specialized lab. Using genealogy databases, investigators began mapping out distant relatives, building a family tree that eventually pointed to one man, Clinton Earl Johnson. Clinton wasn't a stranger. He had been one of Kathy's classmates at Westbrook High School. In fact, he was even a groomsman in her wedding years earlier, not because they were close, but because he was friends with her husband. Kathy and her husband had been high school sweethearts. Clinton moved in the same social circles, and that's how he ended up standing beside them on their wedding day. But detectives later learned that even then, his attention was focused on Kathy. Friends recalled how he spoke about her over the years, how he'd call her the one that got away. After her divorce, when Kathy was living alone, investigators believe he saw that as his chance, a twisted opportunity to take what he thought he'd been denied. Armed with this knowledge, investigators obtained a search warrant for Johnson's DNA. It was a perfect match to the genetic material found at the scene. After 26 years, they finally had their man. Police believe that on the night of January 14th, 1995, Johnson went to Kathy's home under the guise of visiting or helping with something mundane, something that wouldn't raise her guard. Once inside, he attacked her, binding her wrists and ankles with rope or cord. He sexually assaulted her there in the bathroom before forcing her into the tub. There were signs of manual strangulation and drowning, bruising on her neck and face consistent with being held underwater. When officers arrived, the water was still running, trickling from the faucet into a half-filled tub. It wasn't overflowing, but it was high enough to submerge her upper body. Detectives believe Johnson left it that way to stage the scene as an accident, to make it seem like she might have slipped, fallen, and drowned. But because the tub wasn't flooded, investigators also suspected he lingered after the killing, long enough to control the water level or shut off the drain. It wasn't a panicked escape, it was deliberate, calculated. The drowning wasn't meant to kill quickly, it was meant to silence her, to erase any chance she could speak about what he'd done. Then, calm and methodical, he walked out of the house and left her there, hoping the water and time would wash away the truth. In April 2021, police arrested Clinton Earl Johnson, then 62 years old, at his home in Texas. He was charged with capital murder, accused of raping and killing his former classmate and friend. When confronted with the evidence, Johnson denied everything, but the DNA told the story he wouldn't. For Kathy's family, the arrest brought relief but not joy. Her twin sister told reporters, He took away someone who made the world better. We waited half our lives for this. She also said she had sensed something was wrong that weekend, a kind of dread that didn't go away until police called with the worst possible news. Investigators concluded that Johnson's motive was obsession, the kind that grows in the shadows of resentment. He had fixated on Kathy since high school, where she was everything he wasn't, outgoing, admired, and kind. Friends from that time said he always seemed to look at her a little too long, talk about her a little too often. He was a man who couldn't handle rejection, whose self-worth hinged on control. When Kathy married someone else, he was forced to smile through it as one of the groomsmen, standing just feet away from the woman he couldn't have. Over the years, his own life fell apart. Failed marriages, career struggles, quiet bitterness. And when Kathy divorced and began living on her own, detectives believe he saw it as a second chance, an opening to finally take what he thought he'd been denied. But obsession doesn't become love, it becomes control. And when she didn't return his attention, that fantasy twisted into rage. A rage that led him back to her doorstep, 20 years after he first convinced himself she belonged to him. The evidence that had sat in a freezer for decades became the key to justice. Modern DNA technology transformed what was once just a cold trace into a name, a face, and finally, an arrest. Without forensic genealogy, Clinton Johnson might have lived out his life without consequence. Instead, the past caught up with him. This is Decades in the Dark, where science brings the past to light. Subscribe for more stories where justice never expires.